What's true in music is true in life, and that is that timing is absolutely everything. Is now the right time to get married, to have children, to buy a house? Those are big questions with a lot of factors to consider, and so is this one. Am I ready to retire? Ultimately, only you can answer that question, but you'll probably stand a much better chance of answering it correctly with the help of some qualified expert guidance. You're going to get some of that guidance on today's show, plus a whole lot more. It's time to tune out the hype and focus on the facts. Facts that matter to you, the income generation. Let's get started. Get ready to separate reality from myth.
With us, David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
David Scranton.
But David Scranton says, hey, not so fast.
How does it affect the markets? How does it affect the economy? Thanks to efficiencies in new technology and a staff of veteran analysts and portfolio managers, Sound Income Strategies strives to set new standards and bring institutional-style investing to your portfolio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. So, when is the right time to retire? That's a huge question, and it isn't strictly a financial question. In fact, having enough money and the right financial strategy is crucial, of course, but it's only part of the equation. Your health, psychological readiness, and especially your retirement goals factor in heavily. Choosing the right time to retire means knowing what you want from your future and preparing for many possible contingencies. But the question is, how do you do it? Here to help us shed light on that question today is Mary Sterk, author of the brand new book, Ready to Pull the Retirement Trigger, your strategic guide to retire with confidence. Mary's another example of this show's commitment to welcoming fellow experts who share our desire to help everyday Americans protect and manage their money. If we feel that any colleague can bring us unique insights to help us educate our viewers, we're happy to have them here. And as always, we'll also talk with other financial advisors in our field at our Financial Advisor Roundtable and hear from an everyday investor just like you. But first, let's talk a bit more about timing as it relates to retirement.
I don't even know what retired means.
Well, I think it means like you're retired from a job.
It means like done your whole thing. Like my grandparents aren't all retired. They I think Papa, last time I came here, he kind of helped. So I don't technically know what the word retirement means.
When you finish your job and have enough money to live without it.
I would say about 50.
I'm guessing 78. About around 50, 60, or 70.
About 50 something.
Maybe 58.
49.
I think you can be any age.
So, which of those children are right? The answer is they all are. You see, culturally, we adults are programmed to think of age 65 as the, quote, normal retirement age. But in reality, many people retire much earlier than that and many much later. It all depends upon you and your individual situation. And again, it isn't strictly a financial decision. It starts with you and your relationship with your job and your career. See, some people, like myself, just love their work and can't imagine being fulfilled by doing anything else. If you're still feeling that way at 65 or even 70, you're probably not ready to retire yet, regardless of your financial situation. Now, on the other hand, if your job has become a grind, but you're only looking to retirement just to get away from that job, you may also not be ready to retire quite yet. You see, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. I've seen many people retire way, way too early and end up wasting time sitting in front of the television, and they're a lot worse off mentally, emotionally than when they were at their job that they kind of sort of hated. Psychologically, they really weren't ready to retire. That's one reason that I teach that the process of preparing for retirement, which includes deciding when to retire, starts with identifying your retirement goals. You see, if your goal is to buy a yacht and cruise around the world, for example, and there might be one or two of you who have that as a goal, then you now have something specific to help you gauge your readiness. You know you need to have enough savings to make the purchase and to fund the cruise. You know you have to be physically capable and mentally ready. By the same token, if your goals are to spend your days playing golf, fishing, traveling, or spending time with your grandchildren, those goals also give you a readiness gauge. And once you feel certain those things are really going to fill the void of no longer working emotionally and psychologically, then you've made a huge step toward being able to answer the question, when should I retire? The main thing left after that is to determine whether or not you're financially prepared to meet your goals. In other words, it's time to explore the question, will I have enough or more than enough income to go and achieve my goals without depleting my savings? Trying to make that determination without the help of a qualified professional can be risky for many people. There are just way too many complex variables to consider. Taxes, your Social Security benefits, do you have any pension benefits, required minimum distributions, inflation, and the list goes on and on and on. And even if you don't retire until the so-called normal retirement age of 65 or so, then you still have to plan for up to 30 years or maybe even more of income based upon current longevity rates. So, if you're like most people, Social Security alone probably won't provide nearly enough income to reach your goals, even if you get the maximum benefits. It needs to be supplemented with income generated from other sources, such as investments. And that's why I believe it's so incredibly important to make sure that those investments are secure, protected as much as possible against another major market crash, and that they're generating income. But what exactly does all that look like? Well, here's an easy example following what I call the 4% cash flow rule. This is a rule that's just a general guideline which basically says that if your assets are perfectly allocated, if they're allocated for income, then you should be able to take about 4% per year in annual income, providing you can do it through interest and dividends, without too many worries of running out of money. So if you have an even $1 million, let's say, for example, nice round number in invested assets, you can count on it generating $40,000 a year of income. Again, if you're perfectly allocated, which means that you're allocated primarily toward investments that generate income and dividends. Also, that means, when I say perfectly allocated, is that you probably have no more than 35% or so of your portfolio in the stock market. And even that, ideally, is geared more toward dividend-paying stocks. Where's the rest? Well, the rest would be in more alternate strategies specifically designed for protection and income. And of course, if you have less than $1 million, naturally it'll generate less income, and if you have more, it'll generate more. But whatever that 4% cash flow amounts to, the trick then is to combine it with your Social Security income, any pension benefits you might have, and take the total and measure it against your specific retirement goals, against your living expenses, and to some degree the expected length of your retirement, although nobody really knows how long you're going to live. To do all that, you do all that, and then you'll be much closer to being able to answer the question, is now the right time to retire? Closer, but not quite there. Why? Because making that determination can be tricky, and there are a lot of factors to consider. I'll talk more about that a bit later in the show. But right now, let's hear from someone who literally wrote the book on timing your retirement, Mary Sterk. Mary Sterk is the owner of Sterk Financial Services based in South Dakota and author of the new book, Ready to Pull the Retirement Trigger, a strategic guide to retiring with confidence. She's also a classic American success story, having overcome many obstacles to build a thriving business and a career. Mary was once a teenage mom living in low-income housing and raising 2 small children without child support. Today, on the other hand, she's a highly successful and highly respected wealth management specialist, author, coach, and radio personality, and also, near and dear to my own self, an airplane pilot. A great thing that we have in common. Mary, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here.
Let's talk a bit about your story before we dive into today's topic, because it really is inspiring to anybody who's watching the show. You know, you're quoted as saying, if I can achieve this, then anyone can. Do you truly believe that?
You know, I do. I think that everybody has the resources within them to achieve the goals that they have. And my story could be replicated by anybody who has the drive and the motivation to create a brighter future for themselves.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. That gives hope to some people that are watching our show today that, you know, maybe feeling a little down and out, a little depressed. And I agree with you completely. So tell me, what attracted you toward this career in the financial industry and helping other people with their money?
Well, I came into the industry mostly because I needed to figure out how money worked for myself. By the time I was 19 years old, I was already a divorced single mother with 2 kids under 2 years old, and I needed to learn how money worked in order to be able to create a better life for us. So I went back to school, I got an education, I got my certified financial planning designation, and used that information to help build my own life back up, but also then to share that experience and wisdom with people to help them move forward with their own financial journey.
So in the 30 seconds or so we have left in this one segment, can you tell me what is the most important thing you learned that you'd like to tell our viewers about when it comes to managing their money? If there's one thing.
The one thing is that money buys you choices. That's what money does. And aligning the money that you have with the choices you want to make during your retirement is the crux of what a good retirement plan is all about.
So money doesn't bring you happiness, but it brings you choices and flexibility, which then can bring you happiness. So there's one step in the middle. Great. I love it. Mary, thank you. Please stick around. We have a lot more to talk about right after the break, and you are watching The Income Generation. If you're not using someone who's well trained in fixed income and you're born before 1966, it may just be time for you to break up with that advisor and move on. I would suggest someone who will care for you through these important years of your life. If you need help finding someone, call or write us. I'd also like to remind you of the special report entitled The Income Generation. This is available free to you, our loyal viewers, online. If you haven't downloaded your report, pick it up after the show. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, your host. When you should retire isn't strictly a financial question. It does come down to crunching numbers once you've identified your goals and you know whether or not you're psychologically prepared. As we discussed earlier, it's a matter of determining whether you can maintain the lifestyle you want and meet your retirement goals once you've added up your Social Security benefits, other sources like pension income, required minimum distribution, as well as your income based upon that 4% cash flow rule that I mentioned just a moment ago. But how do you really know if that's enough? You know, some people do what I call a bottom-up approach, where they attempt to budget and add up all their expenses. I think that's tedious and sometimes could really cause huge errors and omissions. I'm a fan of what I call a top-down analysis. In other words, instead of starting by adding up expenses that you have in retirement, you take the income you have today and you subtract from it the expenses that you won't have during retirement. That's a top-down analysis. So for example, if you're contributing to your 401k, and of course you're not going to do that when you retire, then that's an example of an expense that you're going to subtract from your current income. So if you were making $100,000 today and you're putting 10% in your 401k, well, now you know that as a retiree you can live off $90,000 and have the same lifestyle. Then how about Fica taxes? Well, you know, Fica taxes are 7.65% when you toss in Medicare. And that's money that you won't be spending because that's only taxed on earned income. When you retire, you won't have to pay that. So now you're down around $82,000 of income to live the same lifestyle as $100,000 today. How about your mortgage? Are you going to pay off your mortgage before you retire? And if so, and your principal and interest payments are $1,000 a month, then you subtract that, and maybe now you're down to $70,000. So in other words, by the time you've subtracted all the expenses you won't have in post-retirement, in this hypothetical example, you may find that $100,000 you're making today is the equivalent of $70,000 of pre-tax income as a retiree with no negative impact. Will that be enough for sure to maintain your lifestyle and achieve your goals? Well, there are additional variables for you and your advisor to consider, but at least you're starting with a hard number identified and specific goals to measure against, because now you can add back to that whatever other goals that you have and how much those might cost. So you're much, much closer to being able to identify confidently whether or not you have enough to retire now. So let's welcome back Mary Sterk. Mary, you know, it's funny because we talked about retirement before, and in the book you have this story about a 50-year-old flight instructor, and this flight instructor didn't think that he or she could retire for a long, long time, and you were able to convince this person that really they were only 2 years away from retiring.
Right.
Can you talk about that for a minute? 'Cause that's a pretty neat story.
Yeah, that was a great story. And we were able to take the top-down analysis like you just talked about and figure out what that number was that they needed, and then add back in the things that were going to be important to them post-retirement, like being able to do some traveling. And in that person's situation, they wanted to actually go back to get some additional education in the aviation industry. And so we put a plan together that pinpointed the exact point that, given a set of variables, they would be able to do that. The beauty of this is that it bought them about 8 to 10 years of their life back instead of having to stay at the job that they were at like they originally thought they'd have to do.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So I know with your obvious youthful appearance, it's clear to me that you're not going to retire for a long, long time. But maybe that's a great goal for you. Come out and become a certified flight instructor as a retirement job many, many years down the road, of course. Have you ever thought about that?
I think that would be a lot of fun. I love flying. And although I might have a youthful experience, I am already a grandmother. And so I want to fly around the country and watch my grandkids grow.
Well, there must be something with that good living in South Dakota. I have to give you a lot of credit. God bless you. You know, you've also talked in your book, we've talked earlier in the show, as you've heard, about the fact that retiring isn't just a financial decision. And you highlighted in the book 2 other major factors to consider. And I'd like you to identify those focus areas for our viewers, please.
I think that retirement really comes down to being like a 3-legged stool. And so the first leg is the financial factors that we just talked about, but the other 2 legs really are health-related factors as well as emotional readiness. Emotional readiness can take a lot of different forms, but that is a huge component of a solid retirement plan. The health-related matters can be health insurance, health care, long-term care type of issues. That's a second huge issue in retirement. And focusing on one of the legs of this stool without making sure all 3 are solid can really create a problem if you don't have all of the legs solidified.
Can you think of a story within your own client base, maybe somebody that met you after they retired, that retired without having all 3 legs in place, and maybe they regretted it?
Yeah, so I have had several people that have not focused on the healthcare side of things before they retired. And I've seen this happen with clients, especially with their parents as they've gone through retirement. A long-term care or chronic illness has hit, and all of a sudden, tens of thousands of dollars a year out of their budget are going to a nursing home, and it's leaving the spouse in a pinch because they don't have the same amount of income coming in to live on that they normally did. So that's why it's so important to take all of those factors into consideration before you pull that retirement trigger to make sure that you have things set up well.
So now you've turned this into what you call a 5-step process. And it starts with understanding your own money philosophy. I'd like you to talk about the process, and also, tell us, do most people come to the table understanding their money philosophy, or is that a discovery process you have to take them through?
No, the money philosophy is not something that people really even know that they consciously have, but somebody's money philosophy really comes from their attitudes about money, and those attitudes start from the time that they're very young. So I always delve into with people what are their earliest money memories and how was money for them when they grew up, because I think that that will inform what their money philosophy actually is. And I think that it starts with understanding how they think and feel about money. And then we move into what their goals and objectives are to figure out what they want the next phase of life to look at. And then we are able to marry those things together to make sure that the money that they have is aligned well with the life that they want to live going forward.
You sound like a psychologist now. Everything goes back to your childhood, right?
You know, I think that that can sometimes be true. I see a lot of times that people who grew up where money was easy aren't as worried about taking risk with it. But people who grew up where money was scarce oftentimes have a very deep fear that even though there's a lot of money in their portfolio, there still could be a place or a reason that they run out. So there's certain fears that are embedded into us depending on how we grew up around money.
Sure, limiting beliefs that go right from childhood. I've seen that myself. So what are the 5 steps that you take people through that you mention in the book?
So when you're ready to go through your planning, the first thing you want to do is understand where you are now, because all progress really starts with telling the truth about here is where you are today. And then we want to understand where you want to go. That's bringing in the goals and objectives. And then we have to figure out the bridge of how to get there. So how do you take all of that information and translate it into something that is going to ensure a comfortable retirement that you never run out of money? So those steps get us to the point where you understand whether or not work is optional for you. I call that the retirement Mecca. That's the point where work is optional. Doesn't mean you have to quit,
Sure.
but it means that you could if you wanted to. And that's just really a delicious level of freedom for people. And once you know what that point is, then you can align the rest of your life behind that and go ahead and pull that retirement trigger.
You know, it's amazing how much more fun work can be when you don't have to go to work every day, and that's a very, very good point. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Time flies when you're having fun, and it's been great today spending time with you, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show, David.
Now, coming up in just a bit, I'm going to talk more about knowing the right time to retire with my fellow financial advisors at my Financial Advisors Roundtable. But before that, Miranda is going to break down some of today's most important financial headlines. Stay tuned. You're watching The Income Generation. If you're near or in retirement, head over to theincomegeneration.com and download your special report written specifically for the needs of the income generation. Again, those born before 1966. I'm David Scranton, and you've been watching The Income Generation.
And welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm Miranda Kahn. Now let's take a look at some of the big finance stories that move the markets this week. The White House kicked off Infrastructure Week Monday. It's a subject the head of J.P. Morgan Chase & Company tells CNBC the U.S. needs to focus on.
We haven't built a bridge in New York City. I mean, we're building one now at Tappan Zee. It's the first one in like 50 years. You know, I just came from Hong Kong. I mean, it's embarrassing. America, the can-do nation, should get back to building and constructing.
Jamie Dimon also says that he thinks wise policy decisions on corporate tax and regulatory reform will help the economy grow. Business Insider reports that Sears and Kmart will close 72 additional stores this year, most of them by September. Earlier this year, the company said that it would close more than 180 locations. The retail chain has lost nearly 1,000 stores in just the past 5 years. And Amazon is making it easier for people on welfare and food stamps to now get a Prime subscription. The company says that it's cutting the price of it by nearly a half. The company's CEO says he wants to help struggling families. For much more on these stories, please visit newsmax.com/finance. I'm Miranda Kahn. Now back to Income Generation with David Scranton.
Thanks, Miranda. Now that you're all up to date, let's hear from some fellow financial advisors on our Financial Advisor Roundtable and get their insights on today's topic. First, today we have repeat guests on another version of our Bald is Beautiful Financial Advisor Week. Back with us today is Sam McElroy, a partner with at Financial Investments in Chicago, Illinois. Sam specializes in creating customized, client-focused strategies and solutions for individuals and businesses. Sam, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
And also back from the great state of Connecticut is my good friend and business partner at Scranton Financial Group, Jay Carrier. Jay's been in the business now for over 15 years, and he specializes in personalized retirement planning and comprehensive portfolio management. Jay, welcome back also.
How you doing, Dave? Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You know, Sam, I'm going to go to you first because I want to talk about the psychology. You know, you come from a background in psychology, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about the psychology of being ready for retirement. You probably have some stories in your own client base where somebody retired before they're ready and it wasn't the happy event they thought it was going to be, or in some who maybe were forced to wait long beyond that time and they also weren't happy. Tell us some stories, Sam. Read me a bedtime story. Come on.
All right. It's almost like, where do you get started? I feel like there are just so many stories, especially when you primarily focus on retirement planning, of successes as well as things that haven't gone well. I think about, a particular couple as far as the situations that maybe didn't work out the way they wanted it to. And the thing that always surprises me is that it's not just about how much you've saved and things like that. You can have a really good income, you can have a lot of assets, but if you haven't really taken care of the fundamentals with respect to, budgeting, taxes, healthcare, inflation, and just thought through everything, then there's a lot of pitfalls as far as things can go wrong. Mm-hmm. I have a couple, they're both in their early 70s, that came to us a couple of years ago. They're both attorneys. They actually work for very prominent firms and have done a lot of work with universities here in Chicago. And literally, they've been trying to retire for about the last 5 years now. They have a home here locally, but they also own a home down in Arizona that they've been trying to get to. And this was a case where it was really two things. It was, number one, just being too heavy in the market and getting caught up in bad market timing. But number two, really just having too much debt. And it becoming this cyclical process where, they're chasing returns and then they're also trying to take some of this income and pay down debt. And in a sense, they're stuck. They've been trying to retire, but literally they just can't figure out the numbers to make it work. And I think that's a real clear example of just a situation where, not taking care of the basics really led to a problem for them.
And it's amazing. I've had people that I've known quite well who I thought would be wonderful, that they'd be great retirees, and they retired. They're miserable. 6 months later, they went back to work. And then I know other people that were complete workaholics. And I get a phone call one day, boom, they're retiring. And they're living the best life ever. It's unbelievable. But in those two cases, it was easy because the math worked. Jay, tell us what happens when you get somebody that walks into our office in Westbrook, Connecticut, and they want to retire now, but you look at the numbers and they can't do it. They just can't make it work. Maybe instead of the 4% cash flow rule, they need 5, 6, or even 7%. How do you coach that person? What do you tell them to try to make them happy, but yet make sure they don't get themselves into trouble?
Yeah, that's it is a tough conversation to have. And I think for most people, and you may have talked about this, the difference between they spend their whole life basing their investable assets on performance. They're looking for a set amount of money to retire, or they're looking to grow their assets to a particular point. And really the conversation to have, and this kind of goes back to the psychology, is trying to convince them or trying to shift or pivot to have more purpose with their money. Is now it needs to be there for a long period of time. Now you need to draw from it. And so I think that's part of that conversation. There's a lot of things that go into it, but making that shift again from performance to having purpose with your assets seems to be more of the psychology behind it.
Which is great, but what you're talking about is somebody who's more growth oriented. They might have enough money to retire. They just need to make a shift in their asset allocation to more income-based strategies because their goal, their purpose is retirement income. That's the easy part, because that's what all of us do every day of our lives when we go to work Monday through Friday. But how about those tough discussions, Jay, when somebody just doesn't have enough money and can't get there? I mean, how do you try to explain to them, how much longer they might have to work and what they might have to do so that they can retire at some point in the future?
Well, again, it's that you talked about it earlier. It's that top-down approach. It's if you have a set finite number of assets that includes maybe a pension, Social Security, and then you have your investable pool of assets that you can draw off of, it just turns into a mathematical sort of equation. Mm-hmm. This is what you have, this is what it can produce, And now, does that fit into your budget? Will you be able to survive or live off of this? And certainly, if the answer is no, then you start to plan on, do we wait to collect Social Security later, thus getting a higher amount? Do we wait and grow your assets to a different point? So every year that they're not collecting off of their assets, they're growing them, and that's an extra year that they can use to sort of budget and to include that into their investable net worth.
Yeah, and if you defer Social Security past standard retirement age, that grows by an extra 8% a year. So that's pretty good. Now, Sam, you are from the Midwest, of course, and you are the quintessential nice guy. You know, Sam, I wish I could say the same for my partner, Jay, but, you know, he's easier with those tough love conversations when he knows in the best interest of clients. But Sam, you're a nice guy. I mean, how do you muster the courage to have these conversations when somebody's begging you to let him retire? I mean, you just let them retire and say, well, hopefully they die before they run out of money, or how do you muster up the toughness to have that difficult conversation with them?
Well, Dave, first of all, this is Chicago, so getting rid of people when they're getting ready to run out of money isn't hard here.
I love it.
But, you know, truthfully, to me, it's about being nice. It's about putting the client first. And it's not so much a question of me having to be hard to let them know that they can't do it, but it's about me being able to coach them through the choices that they're going to have to make. Because at the end of the day, there's a couple different levers they can pull on here. I mean, they could try to cut things out of the budget. They could work a little bit longer. They could do a hybrid approach. They could sell some homes. So it's about helping them understand the ripple effects of what these various decisions make and what they want to do. But I think a really important part of all this is letting them know that they didn't fail. I think that very often what happens is people look at it, and if they don't have this perfect scenario where the numbers just match up and they're able to make it work, they feel in essence like they failed, and they have a tendency to go back and think about, well, I wish I started sooner, or I wish I did this or that. And I think that it's important for us to be able to help encourage them and let them know that it's not a matter of you failing. It's really just a matter of, you know, things happen in our lives and we adjust from it. And now what are we going to do to move forward?
See, that's your psychology background. For any of you, our income generation viewers who've ever been to a shrink, you know that you could say anything. I just went on a mass murdering spree and I killed 16 people in cold blood, and a psychologist just looks at you and goes, now how did you feel when you did that? So I guess that's what enables Sam to overcome the nice guy syndrome. Sam, Jay, stay with us. We have to take a commercial break. And for our income generation viewers, stay with us. We have a lot more from both Jay and Sam. We'll be right back.
Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle, 7 core values to help protect your money in good times and bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Available now.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and now we have our advisors rejoining us. We have Sam McElroy, a partner with @Financial and @Financial Investments in Chicago, Illinois, and Jay Carrier of Scranton Financial Group in Westbrook, Connecticut. Thanks for sticking around, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I like the way I pronounce that, Illinois and Connecticut, by the way, enunciating the words well. You see, that's... Jay, tell me, you know, you've had this before, and I've had this before. Jay, what do you do when you get the left-brained engineer who comes in there and he's really analytical and he says, well, you know, I'm 62 and I'm retiring early because nobody in my family lived a long life. And I've calculated that I could spend my money down over the next 20 years between 62 and 82, spend it down to zero, and I'll be fine. And I'm not worried about it simply because nobody in my family has ever lived past age 82. You know, longevity longer and longer, I mean, there's no guarantees. How do you handle that person?
Well, yeah, certainly you got to start by speaking their language. You know as well as I do, engineers love their spreadsheets. So you can fight an engineer with your own spreadsheet and just use his math against him. And certainly there may be some truth to that. But the bottom line is you always have to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And I hate to say this, but planning for the worst means living longer. And
In that
the longer
case, sure.
you live, certainly, running out of assets is certainly not going to help.
But what do? He says, look, it's my money. Don't worry about it. I'll sign a waiver. Just put this plan together for me. I want to do this. I want to retire tomorrow. What do, Jay? Do you take him as a client? Do you not? What do you walk away because of the liability? I mean, you want to help the guy. That's why we're all in this business. What do you do?
Certainly, it varies across the board. I would probably walk away. I certainly, or if we did take it on as a client, yes, we would have them sign waivers. We would keep very detailed notes. But a doctor, it's the same thing with a doctor. If someone walked into a doctor and the doctor said, you got to stop your lifestyle or you're going to die, and the patient said, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, the doctor is certainly going to continue to do their due diligence. It probably should be the same thing here.
Fair enough. Sam, hope for the best, plan for the worst. How do you, in your practice, follow that mantra?
Yeah, I think it's all about having expectations, setting expectations, managing the expectations. And I think it's about doing contingency planning as well. I see a lot of people make with retirement planning, which is that they have a tendency just to kind of plan up to the date of retirement, not realizing that things ebb and flow and change throughout retirement. So making sure you've thought through, healthcare, inflation, taxes, survivorship scenarios, and things like that. I think it's just kind of the first base. I think the second part of it is just being able to think through, once you have a plan that sounds good, looks good, feels good, what could go wrong? And instead of trying to poke holes in it, that you might be able to find ways to strengthen it and make it incrementally better. But I think that's got to be the idea, is that you're going to plan for the best, or hope for the best, but you got to plan for the worst. So while it's great to use kind of pie in the sky ideas as far as, long-term returns and stuff like that, you always got to pull it back to basics and say, okay, well, what are the known entities, and can we establish a baseline out of what we're looking for this?
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying a big part of it is just educating, taking time to educate the client. Now, Sam, I hate to break it to you, but, I don't know whether it's because your city's bankrupt or what the story is, but your Skype connection seems to be, cutting in and out here. So as soon as we get done, Sam, why don't you go ahead and call the president. He's going to work on the infrastructure there within the Chicago area to get your Skype working better. Is that fair?
That sounds good. I'll get on the lobbying right away.
We're right on it. That's right. So Jay, how do you educate clients? How do you educate them before they become a client? How do you educate them, after they become a client?
Well, certainly there's a lot of places, but let me just use one example. Let's take Social Security, which is for most people going to be, when you take it, the most important decision you make. So, one thing when it comes to Social Security is most people, they do their break-even points. So if I take it now, how long will I have to live in order to get more out of the system? And that's a fair exercise. But from what we've learned is that in regards to Social Security, taking it later for the vast majority of people, at least that I've come across, it's more beneficial. And I'll give one story, and I know you asked for some stories earlier. It was just yesterday, first time in a very long time that I advised a client or one of the spouses at age 62 to take Social Security, take it early. And from my experiences, and again, I'm just using from my experiences, those that should take Social Security early are either those people that absolutely have to take it or those people that don't need it. Thus, taking it early means they're simply just, getting a little extra income on top of what they already have.
Yeah, and the break-even point for Social Security, Jay, for most people is only maybe late 70s. Statistically, you could very well outlive that. So we need to talk about this a little bit more. When we come back, we need to take a break. But for income generation viewers, don't go anywhere. We have an exciting new segment right after this commercial break that I promise you're going to love. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The closing numbers on the markets today. At one point, the market fell as if down a well, over 700 points.
Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4-5%.
We're down over 16%. Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
The stock market is now down 21%.
Because we're now down 43%.
What in the world is happening on Wall Street?
Finally, there is an alternative. Read David J. Scranton's groundbreaking new book, Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Discover practical solutions to the financial challenges facing today's generation of retirees and near retirees. Learn the truth about Wall Street, the financial media, and the secrets they try to hide from everyday investors. This isn't just another book about investing. Working Americans who have lived through 2 major stock market crashes and the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression in the past 16 years don't need another book about investing. David Scranton's approach to financial planning is a holistic system designed for maximum protection, strategic growth, and reliable income regardless of market conditions. Stop planning for retirement with your fingers crossed. Plan with confidence, knowledge, and peace of mind. Read Return on Principle: 7 Core Values to Help Protect Your Money in Good Times and Bad. Available now.
Welcome back to the Income Generation. I'm David Scranton, and I am excited. No, I am downright fired up to introduce a new feature on our show this week. It's our first ever Income Generation Profile, a one-on-one talk with a viewer just like you. I find that oftentimes hearing another person's story is a great way to address some specific challenges and concerns that you might share. And joining us today is Cindy H. right here from the great state of Florida. Cindy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, and I'm excited as well.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you are. You know, it's funny because you told me before that you recently switched financial advisors, and that's a big decision for anyone. So what motivated that change?
Well, and I was a major transition in my life at the time. I sold my business, and I got divorced, and I inherited a substantial amount of money from my parents.
Gentlemen, if you live in Florida and you're single, did you hear that? Just inherited a substantial sum of money. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I wanted to protect it. And so when I was talking to my financial advisors, I started asking questions about different type of income generating avenues. And I realized that the product line that he had was purely stock based. And I didn't have a good feeling about just putting all my money on the stocks because it's so volatile. So that's why I needed a further education of what other options that there are out there.
But I mean, surely he could have educated you. He's a qualified financial advisor. You know, how much did he help educate you about the alternatives?
You know, I must admit, I don't know if he was a qualified financial advisor. I think he was a stockbroker. And so I found out even about bonds. It was a big difference. You know, even learning the term fiduciary is important for anybody to know when they're picking up.
So it sounds like there's really 2 things here. First of all, you kind of outgrew your financial advisor, just like you might outgrow, you know, a pediatrician when you get into adulthood and you have to get an adult primary care physician. Would that be an accurate assessment of what you just described? You outgrew him in a way because your needs changed?
My needs
changed.
But
his business model was not changing with it?
Correct. Correct. And so was my lifestyle.
And also, education seems to be really important. And so tell us, in the next 30 seconds or so we have left, why is education such a big deal? Why is the fact that he really wasn't able to take the time to educate you about alternatives, why was that a big push away, if you will, into the arms of another financial advisor?
Well, I felt that he felt that I didn't respect him and his knowledge when I asked questions. He goes, I've been doing this for 30 years. And I go, please do not take this as an insult to you. I just need to know this. Number one, being a single woman in my 50s, and I need to know other alternatives to protect myself. And I felt that to honor my dad's legacy, I had to protect.
I love it. Sometimes financial advisors just feel as though they have to, you know, don't dare question me. I'm the financial advisor, just like the doctor. Don't dare question me. And that's unfortunate because at the end of the day, nobody cares about your money more than you do. Period. The end. And you have a right to ask any question whatsoever to your financial advisor. And please remember I said that. Cindy, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Stick around. We'll be right back after a break with the final part of our Financial Advisor Roundtable. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. With me once again, we have Sam McElroy from Chicago, Illinois, and Jay Carrier of Connecticut. Gentlemen, thanks for sticking around. Jay, I'm sorry I cut you off right before that last segment when Cindy H. was here. Finish telling your story, if you can, about how you educate clients.
Well, first off, Dave, we've known each other for a really long time, and educating clients, educating prospects, educating really anybody is really everything in what we do. We will spend with a client, we'll spend appointment after appointment after appointment, making sure that the client is completely, fully understands and educated on the financial instruments they're about to do. So I would say it's probably the focal point of our business.
Because Sam, if you think about it, an informed client's a good client, and most people want to make the right decisions. They'll make the right decisions on their own without any salesmanship, as long as they have the facts. So Sam, in the last 30 seconds or so tell us, how do you at your firm take a more educational approach? Because I know that you do.
Yeah, I think that educating clients is quintessential. I mean, our entire process for helping a client become prepared for retirement is all around educating them. If you educate a client, then you and them should arrive at the same decision, and it's really self-empowering for them as well.
Because clients shouldn't need to be sold on a concept. It's a parallel path, both you working together to help them reach their goals. So, Sam McElroy, Jay Carrier, gentlemen, thanks once again for being part of the show.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
And while I'm in the mood of gratitude, I'd like to thank all my guests for joining us for another episode of The Income Generation. I'd also like to thank you, our new and returning viewers. Timing can be a tricky thing. When it comes to major decisions in our lives, though, it may be the single most important thing. And most of us understand that we don't make those decisions hastily. We consult people with whom we have trust, friends, family, and yes, professionals, to help us make the best decisions possible and to get the timing right. That's definitely a tradition worth following when it comes to deciding the right time to retire. It's not strictly a financial question, but when it comes to the financial aspects, it's extremely complicated. The right professional guidance, strategic and personalized, can greatly improve your odds of making a good decision and getting the timing right. So, if you're close to retirement or have retired within the last 10 years and you really want to know how to protect and maximize your money, it's absolutely essential that you stay informed and up to date. And right here is where you can do it on The Income Generation. I'm David Scranton. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.